Ashley Paramore. I think I know everybody, or at least have met everybody today. And what we're actually going to talk about now, the video you just saw mentioned the kosherness of eating, okay? And most people know what Scripture says about what to eat, eat this, don't eat that. We actually talked about that last time, basically. But a lot of people have asked why. What could possibly be the reason? And I realize we don't really have to have a reason to follow Scripture, but it's really kind of cool to know there's modern science behind this. So let me tell you what it is. The laws of kashrut are basically the laws that surround the scriptural commandments that deal with food. Okay? The word kashrut means proper, fit for consumption. Thus, the word kosher comes from that. And really, it's not really a style of cooking, like Mexican food or Chinese food. There's not really a kosher food as a style, but it more is a law-following type of food. So you're not going, and you'll find typical foods, more traditional foods that every kosher family kind of makes their own, like matzo ball soup or whatever, but you're not always going to have the same type of food. You can't go into a restaurant and expect the exact same type of food every time, okay? And what's so sad is that a lot of people don't really think that the laws of kashrut are really needed or necessary anymore. And I kind of fault modern day laws and living for that, because here in the United States, the USDA regulates certain food preparation, and many places that go by their food, they say, well, if it's USDA approved, it must be good. Okay, and it is, of course, but what's interesting is that kosher food is so sanitary that many kosher butchers are actually exempt from USDA inspection and laws.
Wow.
And many people didn't know that. Yeah. So actually, it kind of appears that the biblical laws and the biblical methods are healthier than the laws that we came up with, because they're like, you guys are cool. Well, you go ahead and do your thing, and we'll do ours, because we know that it's so sanitary and so clean. But before I really talk about what the laws are, the science behind the laws, I do want to make sure that we understand there are people that do follow kosher eating laws strictly for health reasons, okay? However, it is more common for people to do it out of love and obedience for God, okay? So that is kind of, you're going to hear the science behind it, but really there doesn't have to be science behind it. If you want to be obedient, this might be something to consider. You will be healthier. Let me go ahead and add that. That's an added bonus from God, okay? But you don't necessarily need that. Okay, so let me find Rand a quick overview of what the laws are. Now, I'm not going to hit on every one of them. I'm going to give a basic overview of this, okay? Certain animals and their products may not be eaten at all. Of the animals that can be eaten, the birds and mammals must be killed humanely in accordance with the law, okay? All the blood must be drained out of it before it's eaten, then it must be prepared so that all the blood is gone. You can salt it, broil it, depending on what you're cooking. Certain parts of the animal may not be eaten at all, okay? Even if the animal is permitted, for example, the sciatic nerve, okay? You're not going to eat that out of respect for when Jacob wrestled with God. His hip was touched and injured, basically, and he limped. That's the reason behind that. Many birds and mammals may not be eaten with dairy, okay? Originally, birds were allowed, and in recent years, rabbis have kind of put a fence around the birds as well, because they want to make sure that no one is committing a sin. Okay, so that's the meat and dairy that people hear a lot about. Fish, eggs, fruits, vegetables, and grains can be eaten with meat or dairy. Okay. Grape products made by those who are not Torah observant may not be eaten. And then there's some rabbinical laws regarding utensils, cooking methods, that kind of thing. I'm not really going to talk about that because there's no real science behind the spoon. But anyway, I'm sure there is. I don't know what it is. But that's a very, very basic breakdown of the law. Okay, very, very, very basic. So let's start with fruits, vegetables, and grains. Okay, these foods are basically neutral foods, par foods. They can be eaten at any time, and I do encourage you to eat them quite frequently. They are very, very good for you. But the fact that they are basically unlimited scripturally, right there tests to the health of them. Okay? Here are your foods. Eat these foods with anything else and you're good. So these foods must be really, really good for you. That's logic, common sense. But the reason why they are so healthy for you, first, because of their high fiber content. If anyone has ever been to my office and you have mentioned juicing, you'll know that I'm not a fan of juicing because you lose all the fiber of the vegetable or the fruit, unless of course you have the the Ninja or one of those super blenders. They are very, very high in fiber content, and that's extremely important for digestive health, your colon specifically. People who have had colon cancers or other digestive cancers are always told to increase their fiber. Certain vegetables actually are really, really high in protein too. And certain vegetables are also high in essential fatty acids, which we're going to talk about in a little while. Fruits and vegetables and grains contain almost, not all of them and every one, but they do contain almost every nutrient that your body needs. So you'll have to eat a variety of them. And they also contain minerals as well. That's why many people can be vegetarian or vegan successfully. Okay, if not, then they would have to eat meats and that kind of thing. So Adonai obviously created them, and he knew this. So that's why he did not limit our intake of them. Okay, so we have a plethora of nutrition within fruits, vegetables, and grains. Okay. Now, those of you who heard my last talk know how I feel about grains. They originally were great. When Adonai created them, they were great. People are the ones who have messed with them in the past 50, 75 years, and they now are genetically modified, most of them, not all. There are about 1 to 3 original grains left that can be sort of kind of easily found on the internet sometimes. They are hard to find, honestly. I don't think you can get them locally anywhere. I think you do have to order them online. But specifically corn and wheat are two really, really highly genetically modified grains, okay? I am not a fan of grains because of that. However, if that had not happened, then absolutely grains would be just fine, okay? And they are very biblical, very scriptural also.
What about the sprouted stuff like the
Sprouted grains?
43? Are they
well, again, if they have been genetically modified, then you're still going to be getting, it may be sprouted, but it's still been messed with. If you can get like an einkorn wheat or something like that and sprout it, that would be ideal. Okay. But yes, sprouted grains, fermented grains.
Probably genetically modified.
Probably, I'm not going to say 100%, but a lot of times you'll see a label that says non-GMO, and that would be a way to know if those are healthier or not.
How do you know whether they're genetic modified or not?
You know.
Well, there are about, maybe 6 states now that have passed labeling laws when it comes to genetic modification. Most places do not have labeling laws, and most places, in the United States do not have labeling laws. if it has not been genetically modified, it should say non-GMO because they're probably very proud of that fact. If it is not labeled, got a 50-50 chance. We know that those foods basically are unlimited, okay, and why? But what about the foods that are limited, okay? Let's start with fish. Fish is probably the easiest of the meat to eat, really. In Leviticus and Deuteronomy, of the things in the waters, you may eat anything that has fins and scales. Okay, so if it has fins and scales, we're good to go. A really easy way to remember what fish to eat is all fish have fins. Not all fish have scales. Okay, so if it has scales, it's going to have fins. So basically, look for scales. But okay, why would it matter if a fish has scales? Let's talk about something like shellfish, okay? Crab, lobster, oysters, crawfish, that kind of thing. Those types of fish basically act as filters for the waters, okay? Lobsters and crabs are actually true bottom feeders. They actually crawl along the bottom, and that's where they live and eat. They eat rotting fish, they eat worms, they eat whatever falls down on the floor of the water. They'll even become cannibalistic if necessary to survive. Okay, that to me is just really gross. Mussels and clams, like your oysters, that kind of thing, they are filter feeders. Okay, they literally pull the water in, filter out the bacteria and everything in the water, and then pump the water back out. So they kind of act like the liver of the water, basically. Do what now? Shrimp, yes. Yeah, shrimp is basically the same thing. They do move around a little bit, and they don't eat quite the amount of bacteria because they also eat some of the bacterial plankton and some phytoplankton, that kind of thing. But yeah, they are also like filters as well. Because these creatures eat from the bottom of the ocean, not only do they get all the toxic products, you know, the decaying fish and the trash that falls down to the bottom, but they also get more heavy metals, okay? Heavy metals in very small amounts are okay for us, they're good for us, but once you get a buildup of heavy metals, it can cause a lot of problems for the body. And not only do these creatures eat the dead fish and the things that naturally occur, but all of our trash that we dump in the ocean and the rivers and whatever, that goes down to the bottom, and many of these creatures eat that too. Okay, like catfish. Catfish will basically eat anything. If it's down there and they can get to it, they're gonna eat it. And I do not want us to eat decaying matter and bacteria and parasites and that kind of thing. So he said, don't eat that. You know, it's a cool creation, but don't eat it. Okay? So those foods are not clean foods. But what about the scaled fish? Why would scales make a difference? Well, a characteristic of a fish without scales that they do normally feed on the waste, okay? And they are very good at keeping the water free of toxins. They are, along with shellfish. But their digestive system readily absorb the toxins because that's actually what they use for food, okay? The scaled fish with fins and scales, they typically eat phytoplankton, okay, which are little bits of vegetables, kind of sea vegetables. And they are actually equipped with a digestive system that prevents absorption of toxins. Now, they still can absorb some heavy metals, but they will dump a lot more of the heavy metals than the non-scaled fish, okay? But they cannot absorb toxins. So that was really cool when I learned that. I'm like, really? That's very interesting. So even if they take, let's say they swallow a big gulp of water and it's full of toxins, well, they're going to excrete that because their body cannot do anything with it, okay? So So that, obviously, they're going to be less toxic in general. And that was probably, in my opinion, the reason that he said, if it's got scales, you can eat it. Okay? Because he knew it would be far less toxic for us. So kosher fish can be eaten with either meat or dairy, okay? Just like the fruits, vegetables, and grains, even though we do have restrictions on the types of fish to eat. And that's actually significant because a minute ago I said we would talk about your omega-3 fatty acids, your essential fatty acids. Like the green leafy vegetables and some of your grains, fish are extremely, extremely high in essential fatty acids. And that is something that the body cannot synthesize itself. In other words, our body has to take it in through what we eat. We cannot make it, okay? So we have to eat these foods in order to get essential fatty acids. And essential fatty acids are extremely important. Among the very few of the things they do, they lubricate the digestive system. They provide nourishment for the intestinal cells, so the lining of the cells that are created, and also the lining of the intestine themselves, which is very, very important because that prevents toxins that we take in from getting into our bloodstream. Okay. And these fatty acids are found in the only foods that are allowed to be eaten with meat or dairy. Okay, so they must be important, right? Because the foods that we have unlimited and then are plentiful, such as the fish, are very, very high in essential fatty acids. Some people cannot tolerate your fish-based essential fatty acids, okay? But that could be the reason that plants are unlimited and fish do have some restrictions. I don't know, that's just my personal guess, but some people have to get their essential fatty acids from plant-based products. So that's just kind of an observation on my point. Thought I'd throw that out there. Okay, moving on. Animal blood. Okay, we mentioned toxins in the bloodstream. So obviously I thought of this next when I was writing. Blood, it carries everything in the body. Okay? It carries oxygen, it carries waste products, it carries nutrients, water, everything. It even potentially can carry bacteria, viruses, parasites also. So it's kind of obvious why God would not want us to eat the blood. Because blood could potentially be the toxin transportation system, okay? And animals are not known for, going regularly to see if they're a naturopath and staying very healthy all the time. So we don't want to eat the blood of an animal that might have been exposed to something and we didn't realize it. Consequently, it is best to slaughter the animal in the prescribed manner and make sure that all the blood is drained, and then make sure that we cook it so that it's completely out. Broiling does that for things such as the liver, because the liver obviously pumps a lot of blood throughout it, so it's one of the bloodiest organs. I know this is gross, I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
She's like, that's cool. But the non-scientific reason is that we don't want to mix life and death. Okay, we're going to talk about that a lot in a minute, I promise. But the scientific reason is because it is a carrier for everything. You don't want to eat everything. You want to drain that out and be done with it. Okay. So now that we've talked about bloody goodness, let's move on to animal fat. Okay. Fat that is subcutaneous, meaning it's going to be right under the skin, around the muscle. That is permissible to consume mainly because when you cook it, it most of the time drains off. It'll melt. Okay. That's the part of when you, let's say you have a steak, sometimes you'll see kind of a white sheen on the top. That's the subcutaneous fat, the stuff that's right under the skin. It's the visceral fat that we don't want to eat. That's not good for us at all. The visceral fat is going to be the fat that surrounds the organs. You may have heard someone say their doctor told them that they had a fatty liver. That's fairly common diagnosis. That's what they're talking about. They have visceral fat around their liver or around their heart or around their whatever. And there are definite biochemical differences in visceral fat and subcutaneous fat. The visceral fat is actually metabolized by the liver, and that is what causes people to have high cholesterol. When you eat that, let's say we took a cow and ate the visceral fat from it, you're basically eating the cow's hard and solidified cholesterol. That's kind of gross. Yeah. Just like, ew, gross. Yeah, it doesn't even sound good, does it? But yeah, that's basically what you're eating when you eat that. Then of course, it would circulate in the blood, and it would clog the arteries, and et cetera, et cetera. We all know the spiel. And that's why a lot of people who decide to eat kosher food, all of a sudden their cholesterol numbers start dropping. Also, visceral fat messes with your hormones. Okay, it produces a lot more estrogen, and estrogen is great, but if you get too much of it, it can cause a lot of problems. Women know it can cause you to be moody, but on top of that, it can cause you not to be able to lose weight, or have heart problems, or have thyroid problems, or have this, or have that, or whatever. Men, muscle weakness, slower metabolism, that kind of thing. So you don't want to eat that because you don't want to voluntarily raise estrogen. And it does affect both men and women, just FYI. The visceral fat also has more proteins than the subcutaneous fat, which can affect glucose levels, blood sugar levels, and that can actually lead to type 2 diabetes, just as an aside. So that's pretty obvious why we're prohibited from eating that particular kind of fat. And although we do need that, we don't eat that kind. Okay, so those are a couple of the parts of the animals not to eat, the blood and the visceral fat. What about the parts of the animals and the animals that we can eat? Birds. Birds are actually, scripturally, are among the most ambiguous, in my opinion, command. Because, don't eat birds of prey or scavenger birds. That's about all it says. So most people say, okay, well, as long as it's not a bird of prey or scavenger, then I can eat it. But scientifically, that actually makes sense, okay? Because your birds of prey are going to typically eat your rodents and that sort of thing, rabbits, mice, that kind of thing, which is, she's making a gross face over here too, which obviously that's unclean. We'll talk about them in a minute. And then your scavengers are going to eat things that are already dead. They probably died of who knows what, so you don't really want to eat that either. So again, that's kind of a common sense, but you've got science to back it up. Because of the bacteria, the possible viruses, the parasites, all of those things would be in your rodent animals or in your already dead animals. And Adam and I did not want us to voluntarily introduce sickness and parasites into our systems. So it's not really the bird itself that would be unclean, but it's the bird's habits. That's my opinion. Because birds are built similarly, but if one has this habit over here, then makes us not really want to eat that particular bird. Okay. Now, of land animals, like non-bird animals, things with feet, I guess, or not wings, Scripture states that we can eat any animal that has cloven hooves, that's a split hoof, and chews its cud. Okay. And there are actually 3 animals that chew cud but don't have the cloven hooves. The hare, the rock badger, also called the hyrax, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, and the camel. The hares, or rabbits, as well as all rodents, and even horses, I think, have an enlarged cecum, okay? And that is the pouch. We have a little tiny one, really, but they have a pretty large cecum. That's the pouch that opens up into the intestines, okay? So you have the stomach, and you have the sacrum, and you have the little, or the big intestines. Well, they have the stomach, and they have the sacrum, and then they have their intestines. So it's much larger. The reason why is because the food, they swallow the food, it goes through the stomach, and then it goes to sit in the sacrum, and it ferments in the sacrum, okay? It starts to break down, okay? And then they regurgitate it, and then they actually eat it. So when you think about that, they're actually eating their feces. That's what it breaks down to, okay? And that's really nasty. But that's highly toxic, obviously, okay? I've grossed her out over here, I'm so sorry. Yeah. But, yeah, then that's basically what happens with that. And so that would be why the hare, rodents, horses are unclean. Now, rock badgers or hyraxes, I think is how you pronounce it, they also do not have body temperatures that regulate. So if it gets really cold, they may get really cold. Their body temperatures do not self-regulate like other creatures, which can actually cause their digestive enzymes to be unstable, okay? That leads to the same concept, the same type of thing as with the hares or the rodents. Fermentation at odd times and more toxicity, and again, it is not only toxic, but it's very acidic because the acids are leached into the muscle. So if you were to eat the muscle, then you would be eating highly acidic meat, as well as filled with toxins because of the fermentation process. And you don't want to eat highly acidic meat because that leads to diseases such as cancers and viruses because they thrive in an acidic environment. Camels do have a digestive tract like clean animals, okay? But, and this was actually a really cool thing when I learned this, it is their water hoarding properties that make them unclean, okay? We know camels, you can give them amount of water and they can go like forever without drinking water, and that's because they don't sweat, okay? They actually suck the water back in, basically. We all know that sweat is one way that our bodies rid toxins. If they don't sweat, where are the toxins going? When they suck it back in, they're going back into their bodies. So that would make them highly toxic and not fit for consumption. But there is one animal, and only one, that has cloven hooves but does not chew its cud. Everybody knows what that one is. The pig. Yeah. The pig is similar to the camel because they also don't sweat, okay? And they do internalize all their toxins the same way. But on top of that, toxins are stored in fat cells, okay? That's universally known. Pigs are really, really fatty creatures, okay? Besides the fact that they don't sweat, they have all these fat cells that, since they don't sweat, get a lot of toxins dumped into them when they just sit there. And that's where they sit. They store the toxins long term. So if that was the only problem with pigs, that would still be really, really gross. But when you cut into a pig, you'll notice that they have lots of layers of fat and lots of fat around every part of their body. So there will be no part of the pig that will be untouched by that, the toxins. But on top of that, they also have really, really high levels of bacteria such as salmonella and other really bad things. They're also high in histamines. So a lot of people are actually allergic to pork because of the high histamine level in the pork. Yeah, isn't that weird?
It makes sense
Yeah,
somehow.
it does make sense, yes. But yeah, they are actually allergic to it, so they can't eat it because of that. So now they've got 3 strikes against them, but the 4th strike against the pigs is that they are omnivorous. They will literally eat anything. Anything. They even can be cannibalistic. So, 4 strikes against the poor pig. And I think pigs are really cute, but I'm not going to eat them. I'm not even going to go near them because they're just pigs. Anyway. But yeah, so pigs are definitely unclean foods, not only biblically, but scientifically. And that makes it apparent why God did not want us to eat the pig. Okay? And now the final thing that I want to touch on, how am I doing on my time? Where's my, well, I think I've got about 10. Oh, right. I actually saved this for last because this is a concept that was the most difficult one for me. I have literally worked for weeks researching this one law, okay? Because it's, well, you'll see. This is mixing meat and dairy, okay? Dun, dun, dun. Yes, I did. I literally, I've probably worked on this one law for a good 6-8 weeks, okay? And I'm a really good researcher too. I mean, you know, if anybody ever talks to me, you'll be like, God, you're such a nerd. Yeah, I am. But you know, anyway, I searched for like 6 or 8 weeks only to come up with the fact that although there is some evidence that dairy does inhibit the digestion of proteins, there is not enough evidence for me to say this is a scientific fact. Okay? Sorry. But because of all of my research, I have come up with a really good reason why God told us not to mix meat and dairy. Let's talk about the one that many people already know, and the one that I've also come up with. When Adonai was giving his dietary laws, there were people who were idol worshippers, who worshiped other gods. And one of their rituals would be that they would slaughter a baby animal, okay, and then they would milk its mother, and then they would boil the baby animal in its own mother's milk, and then they would offer that as a sacrifice. That obviously plays a big role in why we are not supposed to do that. I mean, first of all, that is just awful and inhumane and everything else. But we don't want to give a semblance of worshiping another God either. And although I am unaware of any group that currently practices that, there may be, I don't know. But we don't want to give any semblance of that. Yes, ma'am?
Do you know, did you find the reason why they did that? What was the purpose of?
A lot of it was for fertility, and general sacrifice for, you know, whatever reason they were going to. But yeah, a lot of it was for the fertility, and they wanted to ensure good blessings from their God, that kind of thing. I don't know why God would bless that, but anyway, whatever. Mm-hmm. So that is one of the reasons, okay? But although I can't say anything about the inhibition of digestion, I had mentioned earlier about the mixing of life and death, okay? And this is actually the main reason why I think that this particular law was put into place. The mother's milk provided life to the baby animal, whatever kind of animal it was, okay? And by slaughtering the animal, we obviously cause its death, okay? Putting the meat back into the substance that gave that very meat its life is mixing life and death together. When something is cooked, particularly when it's boiled, you know, anybody who's ever cooked knows that everything just kind of goes like this when it's being boiled. It makes it a part of a dish, of an entire dish. It's no longer separate pieces, okay? So by mixing the life-giving substance and the dead substance, mixing it together, it becomes one big substance. Just as we were told to be set apart people, when we mix life and death, that kind of throws that concept out the window. Because the mixing of the meat and the milk is not really there's not really a scientific reason. There's a much deeper reason, okay? It's a reminder to us, at least 3 times a day, and for some of us like me, more, because I eat a lot more than 3 times a day. It's a reminder that we are called to be different. We are called to be set apart by not mixing with the death. Because when what Yeshua did for us, he gave us life, okay? He gave us life. Now, if we step right back into the death of the world, we are mixing things that were not meant to be mixed, okay? We cannot serve 2 masters. And by not mixing the meat and the milk, that is a daily reminder to us, hey, you are set apart people. We gave you life. Yeshua gave you life. Don't mix with the death of the world, with the sin of the world. And so that is actually my personal opinion as to why that law was given for the generations and not just for the time period where that was a common pagan practice. So hopefully I gave you guys a little bit of interesting, albeit gross information behind the science of the kosher eating. And we can see that God's plan for us from the very, very, very beginning was life, was health. And if we follow his laws, we'll have that, you know? So that's what I got for you. Do y'all have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay, you talking about, the rabbinical kosher with the blood, that they, you have to get it a certain way. For you, do you find that you'll broil it out? Is that how you?
I salt it.
You salt it? How does
Because my husband is really good on the grill.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily going to broil it. I salt it. And I actually have a little, it's kind of a MacGyver kind of setup that I have, but it leans the blood down into the sink so that it drains. And I will always get more blood out of the meat, even if it's supposedly drained with blood.
How does that affect you when you eat out?
Yeah, eating out is hard because locally, particularly, there are no real kosher places.
Yeah.
It will kind of depend on where I'm eating as to what I get.
Okay.
But I will also fall back on the scripture that says what my heart's intent is and what is available to me.
Yes.
It may not be the same thing.
Rojo Mexican.
Mushrooms are,
Because I see it in kosher stuff.
yes, they're actually fungus, but they are considered a plant of the earth,
Okay.
so they would fall under vegetables.
So are they healthy?
Very.
Okay.
Well, as long as they're not the psychedelic mushrooms. And I don't encourage you to do those. Yes, they are very healthy for you.